Okay, I'm back. Chapter 6. As he passed through the antechamber, the police commissary motioned to two gendarmes who placed themselves on either side of Dantes. A door leading to the Palace of Justice was opened, and they passed through one of those long dark corridors which bring an involuntary shudder to all those who enter them. Just as Villafort's apartment communicated with the Palace of Justice, so the Palace of Justice communicated with the prison. After turning down a number of different corridors, Dantes and his escort came to an iron door. It opened and clanged shut behind him. He now breathed a different air, foul and heavy. He was in prison. He was led to a rather clean cell whose appearance aroused no fear in him. Besides, Villafort's reassuring words still echoed in his ear. Night soon fell, and the cell was plunged in darkness. With the loss of his sight, his hearing became more acute. At the slightest sound, he would stand up and walk to the door of his cell, convinced that he was about to be set free, but soon the sound would die away in another direction, and he would sink back onto his stool. Finally, toward 10 o'clock, just as he was beginning to lose hope, he heard footsteps outside in the corridor. They stopped before his cell, a key turned in the lock, and the massive door opened, revealing the dazzling light of two torches. Dantes saw 4 gendarmes. Gendarmes are like guards, guys. They're like French guards. "Have you come for me?" he asked. "Yes." "Were you sent by the deputy public prosecutor?" "Of course." The knowledge that they had been sent by Villefort relieved the unfortunate young man of all anxiety. He placed himself calmly in the middle of his escort. A police van was waiting for him in the street. The door was opened, and he felt himself being pushed inside before he had time to say anything, although he had no intention of resisting. A moment later, he was sitting between 2 gendarmes, with the other 2 seated opposite him. The heavy van set out for its unknown destination. So Dantes is so trusting good, guys. No, he trusts good. Villefort will get him out, and he's probably being led to freedom now. When it finally stopped, Dantes found himself in the port. 2 of the gendarmes got out first, then Dantes was followed by the other 2. The 4 of them led him to a boat which a customs officer was holding alongside the quay by a chain. He was soon seated in the stern of the boat, still surrounded by the 4 gendarmes, while a police officer placed himself in the bow. The boat was shoved off, 4 oarsmen began to row vigorously, and before long Dantes found himself outside the harbor. "Where are you taking me?" he asked one of the gendarmes. So Dantes is expecting to be freed, but right now he's in a rowboat, and they're like rowing him into the ocean, and Dantes is like, "What's happening?" "You'll know soon enough, but we're forbidden to give you any information." Dantes said no more. He waited silently and thoughtfully, trying to pierce the shadows of the night with the practiced eye of a sailor accustomed to space and darkness. Meanwhile, the oarsman had stopped rowing and hoisted a sail. Finally, despite his reluctance to question the gendarme a second time, Dantes said to him, "Comrade, in the name of your conscience, I beg you to take pity on me and answer me. I've been falsely accused of some sort of treason, but I'm a good and loyal Frenchman. Where are you taking me? Tell me, and on my honor as a sailor, I'll do nothing except resign myself to my fate." "Unless you're blindfolded or have never been outside the harbor of Marseille," replied the gendarme, "you must be able to guess where you're going by now. Look around you." Dantes stood up and looked in the direction the boat was moving. Several hundred yards ahead rose the steep black rock on which stood the somber Chateau d'If. The unexpected appearance of this dreaded prison with its centuries-old tradition of terror produced the same effect on Dantes as the sight of the gallows on a man condemned to death, okay? The Chateau d'If is a French prison, guys. It's the worst French prison ever. It's the prison for the worst criminals. They have torture. Once you go into the Chateau d'If, you're not going out alive. The Chateau d'If? What are we going there for? The gendarme smiled. You can't be taking me there to be imprisoned, went on Dantes. The Chateau d'If is a state prison used only for important political prisoners. I've committed no crime. Am I really going to be imprisoned there? Probably. But Monsieur de Villefort promised. I don't know what Monsieur de Villefort promised you, said the gendarme. All I know is that we're going to the Chateau d'If. Wait, quick, men! Come here! Dantes had tried to throw himself into the sea, but 4 vigorous arms pulled him back as soon as his feet left the bottom of the boat. He fell back howling with rage. The Chateau d'If is so awful that Dantes even tried to jump off the boat na lang. All right, my friend, said a gendarme, pinning him down with his knee. If you make one more movement, just one, I'll put a bullet through your head. And Dantes felt the muzzle of a carbine pressed against his temple. A short time later, he felt the boat strike something and realized they had landed. His guards pulled him to his feet, made him climb out of the boat, and dragged him toward the steps which led up to the citadel. He made no useless resistance. His slowness came from inertia rather than opposition. He felt numb, and he staggered as though he were drunk. He was aware of steps which forced him to raise his feet. He noticed that he had gone through a door which had closed behind him, but he did everything mechanically, and he seemed to be surrounded by a thick fog. He finally came to a halt. Certain that he could no longer flee, the guards released him. After a wait of 10 minutes or so, a voice said, "Have the prisoner follow me. I'll take him to his cell." "Go on," said one of the gendarmes, pushing him. Dantes followed his guide into a room which was almost entirely underground, whose bare, oozing walls seemed to be impregnated with tears. A sort of lamp standing on a stool, its wick swimming in fetid oil, illuminated this frightful lodging and allowed Dantes to see his guide, a subaltern jailer with dirty clothes and a stupid face. "This is your room for tonight," he said. "It's late, and the governor is asleep. Tomorrow, when he's read his instructions concerning you, he may have you put into another cell. In the meanwhile, here's some bread, there's water in that jug, and there's some straw on the floor over there in the corner. You have everything a prisoner could wish for. Good night." Before Dantes could say anything in reply, the jailer picked up the lamp, walked out, and locked the door behind him, leaving the cell in utter darkness. When the first rays of dawn were beginning to bring back a little light to the cell, the jailer reappeared, having received orders to leave the prisoner where he was. Dantes had not moved. He seemed to have been nailed to the same spot where he had stopped when he entered the night before. He had spent the whole night standing up without sleeping for a single instant. He was just standing there, like they put him in a cell and he was just standing there for the entire night. He didn't even move. The jailer walked up to him, but Dantes did not seem to see him. He tapped him on the shoulder. Dantes started and shook his head. "Haven't you slept?" asked the jailer. "I don't know." "Aren't you hungry?" "I don't know." "Do you want anything?" "I want to see the governor." "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because the regulations of the prison don't allow prisoners to request it." "What is allowed here?" "Better food if you pay for it, walks outside, and sometimes books." "I don't need books. I don't feel like taking a walk, and the food is good enough for me. I want only one thing. I want to see the governor." "Listen," said the jailer, "don't start brooding over something impossible like that, or you'll go mad within 2 weeks." "Do you think so?" "Of course. That's how madness always begins. For example, there was a priest who used to have this same cell. It was constantly offering to give the governor 1,000,000 francs if he would set him free. That finally twisted his brain." "What happened to him?" "They put him into a dungeon." "Listen," said Dantes, "I'm not a priest and I'm not mad. I can't offer you 1,000,000 francs, but I can offer you 300 francs if you'll deliver a letter to a girl named Mercedes the next time you go to Marseille. Not even a letter, just 2 or 3 lines. If I took those 2 or 3 lines and got caught with them, I'd be discharged. I make 1,000 francs a year here, not counting the food, so I'd be an idiot to risk losing 1,000 francs with the chance of earning 300. Listen then, if you refuse to deliver a letter to Mercedes, or at least let her know I'm here, someday I'll be hiding behind the door when you come in, and I'll break open your head with this stool." Okay, this is the first moment we see a dark side from Dantes. Dantes up till now has been very kind, has been very innocent, but now we see here he's so mad, and he told the jailer, like, if you don't deliver a message to Mercedes, I will kill you. Like, one day you'll enter here and then I'll break open your head. Good. This is the first kind of glimpse we get into the dark side of Dantes. Threats, cried the jailer, stepping back and putting himself on the defensive. The priest began like that. Within 3 days you'll be raving mad, just as he is. It's a good thing there are dungeons in the Chateau d'If. Dantes picked up the stool. All right, said the jailer. Since you're so set on it, I'll go tell the governor. Good, said Dantes. He set the stool on the floor and sat down on it with bowed head and haggard eyes, as though he actually were mad. The jailer went out and returned an instant later with 4 soldiers and a corporal. By order of the governor, he said, take the prisoner to the floor below this one. To the dungeon, asked the corporal. That's right, we have to put madmen with madmen. The 4 soldiers took hold of Dantes, who fell into a kind of apathy, and followed them without resistance. He descended 15 steps, the door of a cell was opened, and he entered, mumbling to himself, he's right. They have to put madmen with madmen, oh my. Chapter 7. In his small study at the Tuileries in Paris, seated at the walnut table, which he had brought back from his exile in Hartwell, and to which he was greatly attached, King Louis XVIII listened rather absent-mindedly to a grey-haired, aristocratic-looking gentleman of about 50. His Majesty continued to make notes in the margin of his edition of Horace, as this gentleman spoke to him. What were you saying? Said the king. That I am extremely worried, sire. I have good reason to believe that a storm is brewing in the south. I am afraid you have been misinformed, Duke. I know for certain that the weather is fine down there. Intelligent as he was, Louis XVIII was given to facile jesting. Your Majesty may be quite right in counting on the good sense of the French people, but I don't think I'm entirely wrong in fearing the possibility of some desperate attempt. By whom? By Bonaparte, or at least by his partisans. My dear Blacka, said the king, your alarm is keeping me from working. Okay, so we go from Dantes in chapter 6 to the king in chapter 7, okay? And his advisor is kind of telling the king that you have to be worried about Bonaparte. He's planning something, and the king is like, don't worry about that. Stop worrying me about that. And your feeling of security keeps me from sleeping, sire. My alarm doesn't come from vague, unfounded rumors, but from an intelligent, trustworthy man who has just arrived from Marseille to tell me. A great danger threatens the king. I therefore came to you immediately, sire. I think it extremely important that you see Monsieur de Villefort. Monsieur de Villefort, exclaimed the king. Is he the man who just arrived from Marseille? Why didn't you tell me his name immediately? I thought the name was unknown to your Majesty. Not at all. He's a serious-minded young man, honorable, intelligent, and above all ambitious. Furthermore, you know his father by name. His father? Yes, his name is Noirtier. Noirtier the Girondin? Precisely. And your Majesty has employed the son of such a man? Blackas, my friend, you don't understand these things. I told you Villefort was ambitious. He would sacrifice anything to his ambition, even his own father. Shall I bring him to you, sire? Yes, immediately. The Duke hurried out of the room with the alacrity of a young man and returned a short time later with Villefort. As the door opened, the latter found himself face to face with the king. He stopped short. Come in, Monsieur de Villefort. Come in, said the king. Villefort bowed and took a step forward, waiting for the king to question him. Monsieur de Villefort, said Louis XVIII, the Duke here informs me you have something important to tell us. The Duke is right, sire. I have come to Paris as rapidly as possible to inform your Majesty that, in the exercise of my duties, I have discovered a conspiracy of dire importance, a veritable tempest which directly threatens your Majesty's throne. Sire, the usurper has manned 3 vessels, and has by now almost certainly left the Isle of Elba. His destination is unknown, but he will surely attempt a landing either at Naples or on the Tuscany coast or in France itself. Your Majesty is no doubt aware that the usurper has maintained partisans in both Italy and France. Yes, I know that, said the king, strongly agitated. But please continue. How did you learn these facts? I learned them in Marseille from a man whom I had been watching for a long time, and whom I had arrested the day I left for Paris. This man, a turbulent sailor whom I had previously suspected of Bonapartism, had made a secret trip to the Isle of Elba. The marshal there entrusted him with a verbal message for a certain Bonapartist in Paris, whose name I was unable to make him tell me, but I did learn that he was to instruct this Bonapartist in Paris to prepare his adherents for a return of the usurper within a short time. "And where is this man now?" asked the king. "In prison, sire." "Ah, here's Monsieur d'André," cried the duke. The minister of police had just appeared on the threshold. He was pale, trembling, and almost wide-eyed with terror. Okay, so Villefort is using the information from the letter to kind of inform the king, no? He told the king about the letter. Like, there was a letter, and there's this Napoleon is coming to France. These were the contents that were in the letter, and Villefort is using that information to get into the good graces, to get into the good eye of the king, no? Nga, I am doing this for you, king. We have to fight Napoleon, okay? And then he obviously is lying about his father, no? He said, I don't know the name of who this message was supposed to be delivered to. And he also lied. He said it was a verbal message instead of it being a letter. Because if you remember, he burned the letter so his father wouldn't be sakpan as a traitor, no, so he wouldn't be ruined. So he's basically using the information from the letter in order to get the king's approval. The king violently pushed back the table at which he was sitting and cried out, "What's the matter, Baron? You look panic-stricken. Does your alarm have anything to do with what Monsieur de Villefort was just telling me?" Sire, stammered the Baron. "Speak." The Minister of Police threw himself at the king's feet in despair and cried out, "A terrible disaster, sire. The usurper left the Isle of Elba on the 28th of February, and on the 1st of March he landed in France, at a little port near Antibes. The usurper landed in France near Antibes, only 250 leagues from Paris, on the 1st of March, and you learned of it only today, the 3rd of March? Impossible! Either you've been misinformed or you're mad. Alas, sire, it's only too true." Louis XVIII made a gesture of unspeakable anger and alarm, and leaped to his feet. "In France?" he cried. "The usurper is in France? Wasn't he being watched? But who knows, perhaps certain persons were in league with him." "Oh, sire," exclaimed the duke, "a man like Monsieur d'André cannot be accused of treason. We were all blind. He merely shared the common blindness." "But," began Villefort, then, stopping short, he said, "Forgive me, sire, forgive me. I was carried away by my zeal." "Go on, speak boldly," said the king. "You were the only one to warn us of the disaster. Help us now to remedy it." "Sire," said Villefort, "the usurper is detested in the south. It will not be difficult to make Provence and Languedoc rise up against him." "No doubt," said the minister, "but he's advancing by way of Gap and Sisteron." "He's advancing?" exclaimed the king. "Do you mean he's marching on Paris?" The Minister of Police kept a silence which was equivalent to the most complete avowal. "In that case," said the king, "I have no further need of you, and you may withdraw. What remains to be done now concerns the Ministry of War, Monsieur de Villefort. You are no doubt quite tired from your long journey. Go get some rest. You'll stay at your father's house, won't you?" Villefort felt as though he were about to faint. "No, sire," he said. "I'll stay at the Hotel de Madrid in the Rue de Tournon." "Oh, yes," said the king, smiling. "I was forgetting that you're not on good terms with Monsieur Noirtier, which is another sacrifice to the royal cause, for which I must reward you." "Sire, the kindness you have already shown me is a reward, which so far surpasses all my ambitions, that I have nothing more to ask. Be that as it may, we shall not forget you. In the meantime, take this." The king took off the cross of the Legion of Honor, which he customarily wore next to the cross of Saint Louis, and handed it to Villefort. Villefort's eyes filled with tears of pride and joy. He took the cross and kissed it. "Go now," said the king, "and if I should happen to forget you, a king's memory is short, don't be afraid to bring yourself to my attention." As Villefort was leaving the Tuileries with the Minister of Police, the latter said to him, "You've made a magnificent beginning, Monsieur de Villefort. Your fortune is assured now." "I wonder how long it will take," thought the Villefort. Okay? So this whole chapter was just about Villefort using Dantes' letter, no, to get ahead and to get in power again, no, because now the king loves Villafort, okay, and it came with the price of Dantes being imprisoned forever for Villafort to get this honor, no, so that it could never be revealed that it was the father of Villafort who was really a Bonapartist, who was really the traitor. Okay, chapter 8. Events followed one another swiftly. The story of Napoleon's strange, miraculous return from Elba is well known. Unexampled in the past, it will probably remain unimitated in the future. By the way, guys, this is all historical good, no? That's the thing about the Count of Monte Cristo. It's historical fiction. It's a fictional story, but set in something that really happened in history. And in this case, it's really during this time of civil war in France with Napoleon versus the king and the royalty. Okay. Louis XVIII made only feeble efforts to parry the blow. The monarchy, which he had scarcely finished reconstructing, trembled on its insecure foundations, and a single gesture from Napoleon was enough to bring down the whole edifice, which had been nothing more than a formless mixture of ancient prejudices and new ideas. Villafort, therefore, gained nothing from the king except a gratitude which was not only useless but even dangerous. Napoleon would no doubt have dismissed him had it not been for the protection of his father, Monsieur Nortier, who had great power at the court of the 100 Days. Okay, so Napoleon successfully took down the monarchy. This whole conspiracy that Edmond Dantes didn't even know he was a part of, it eventually led to Napoleon winning over the monarchy. The king fell, Napoleon succeeded, and Villafort, who put Dantes in jail just to get into the good graces with the king, now he was an enemy of Napoleon, but what saved him, guys, was his father. His father, Boyogud, was a loyal Bonapartist, so his father protected Villafort. So it's like Villafort abandoned his father to become a royal, to become an aristocrat, okay, and then he betrayed Edmond Dantes so that he would be so that the king would approve of him. But then the king fell, Napoleon rose in power, and now the only thing protecting him is his father, the father he abandoned, Nortier. Villafort kept his post, but his marriage, while not abandoned, was postponed until happier times. If Napoleon remained in power, Villafort would require a different wife, and his father undertook to find one for him. If, on the other hand, a second restoration were to bring Louis XVIII back to the throne, Monsieur de Saint-Méran's influence would be twice as great as before, and a marriage with his daughter would become more advantageous to Villafort than ever. Villafort, you guys, he's also a snake, good. He's very ambitious. So, he didn't even marry, originally the girl he was supposed to marry, because he wanted to wait. Because he said, okay, if Napoleon will stay in power, I have to marry someone else. Okay, I'll marry a girl who Napoleon approves of, but if the king will go into power again, then I will marry that girl I was originally supposed to marry, because she's a royalist, and she's rich, and she's a noble. Okay, so Villafort, he just uses people around him to get stuff for himself, to get fame, to get power. He just uses everyone around him. As for Dantes, he remained a prisoner. Lost in the depths of his dungeon, he heard nothing about either the fall of Louis XVIII or the collapse of the empire. 3 times during this brief revival of the empire known as the 100 Days, Monsieur Morel came to see Villafort and insist that Dantes be set free, and each time Villafort calmed him with promises and hopes. Then came Waterloo. Morel no longer came to see Villafort. He had done everything he could for his young friend. To make new efforts to procure his liberty under that second restoration would have been simply to compromise himself uselessly. When Louis XVIII returned to the throne, so again, Napoleon took over, the king went down, but again, the king fought back, and then the king again became king of France. So it's a very messy time, no? And Dantes is just forgotten in prison. When Louis XVIII returned to the throne, Villefort asked for and obtained the post of public prosecutor, which was vacant at Toulouse. 2 weeks later, he married Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, whose father stood in higher favor at the court than ever. During Napoleon's short return to power, Danglars was afraid. He expected to see Dantes reappear at any moment, threatening, strong, and eager for vengeance. He therefore handed Monsieur Morel his resignation and entered the service of a Spanish merchant. He left for Madrid, and nothing more was heard of him. So Danglars left France. Fernand showed less concern. Dantes was absent, that was all he needed to know, and he did not seek to learn what had become of him. Meanwhile, the Empire made one last appeal to its soldiers, and every man capable of bearing arms rushed to obey the voice of the Emperor. Fernand left along with the others, leaving Mercedes behind and tormented by the dark, terrible thought that his rival might return during his absence and marry the woman he loved. His devotion to Mercedes, the compassion he seemed to have for her sorrow, the zeal with which he anticipated her slightest desire, all these things produced the effect which signs of devotions always produce in a noble heart. Mercedes had always been fond of Fernand as a friend. Her affection was now deepened by a new feeling, gratitude. He went off to the army with the hope that if Dantes did not return, Mercedes might someday belong to him. Mercedes was left alone, bathed in tears. She was seen ceaselessly wandering around the little village of the Catalans, sometimes standing motionless in the blazing heat of the southern sun, sometimes sitting on the beach, listening to the eternal moaning of the sea, and asking herself whether it would not be better to let herself sink into the depths rather than undergo the cruel suffering of a wait without hope. The thing is, you guys, with Mercedes, Dantes, he just disappeared. The police took him away and he's gone. She doesn't know where he is. She doesn't know if he's alive. He's just gone. He just disappeared from her life. And so Mercedes is just broken about it. She did not lack the courage to do the deed. It was her religion which came to her aid and saved her from suicide. Dantes' father lost all hope when the empire fell. 5 months after he had been separated from his son, he breathed his last in Mercedes' arms. So the father of Dantes died, Bagyod. He died of a broken heart 5 months after Dantes was arrested and never returned. Monsieur Morel paid for his funeral and discharged the small debts which the old man had incurred during his illness. It took more than benevolence to do this. It took courage. The South was aflame, and to help the father of a Bonapartist as dangerous as Dantes, even on his deathbed, was a crime. So Monsieur Morel risked his life to buy the father a funeral because it was known again, Dantes, he's a Bonapartist, he was a traitor to the throne, and for Monsieur Morel to take care of the father was dangerous for Monsieur Morel. And so Monsieur Morel risked his life just to take care of the father of Dantes, who unfortunately did die. Whew. It's a very intense story. It's a very intense book. Alright, so that was chapter 8. So chapter 9 will be in the next video.